Okay, so this week was asked and requested by one of our awesome Patreon subscriber, Fabio, and he asked us to cover the New Zealand weather in July a little bit early this month because he's about to come to New Zealand. So awesome, we're going to be talking about that. If you're planning on traveling in New Zealand in July, you're going to be blessed with pretty much no one around, which is really, really awesome. You're going to have the whole country to yourself. However, you may be cursed by some of the coldest weathers that New Zealand have to offer, so you will want to be prepared, and this is exactly what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to cover everything you need to know about the weather in New Zealand in July. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so let's begin our coverage of the New Zealand weather in July with some travel tips for visiting New Zealand in July with the great Laura.
Okay, starting with our first travel tip is that July is considered the low season in New Zealand, meaning that it is the quietest season in terms of tourists. So with that in mind, you don't really need to book your whole trip way in advance. Usually you can travel a bit more spontaneously. There's usually room available in a lot of accommodations, with the exception of ski field towns where it's actually the high season in those towns, because obviously July is winter. It's a bit busier in those towns, for instance, like Queenstown, Wanaka, Owakuni, for instance. So just bear in mind those places will be busy. And of course, as always, Milford Sound is always busy, and Lake Tekapo, which have limited accommodation. So just for those oddities, always best to plan ahead. But for everywhere else in the country, you can just travel without too much care.
Milford Sound is always busy for sure.
It's always busy. Next up, we have always check for road updates when you are traveling around New Zealand in July. It's best to go onto the New Zealand Transport Agency website before you're about to set off on a road trip. Just check the roads that you're going to be taking, see if there are any weather warnings, road closures, or warnings for snow, that sort of thing. Maybe you want to take a detour if you don't have any snow chains, but if you are going up into a mountainous region, you might just want to have that backup handy and be able to know how to use them if you are going into places where it's likely to snow. So yeah, just make sure you check on those weather updates before you set out on the road. Next up, we have, if you do plan to drive to any of the ski fields in New Zealand, then make sure you do have some snow chains available.
And you ask your car rental company to show you how the snow chain are put in place on the car, how to put them on.
Yes, exactly. You will find that almost all car rental companies, especially around areas where there are ski fields like Queenstown, around Christchurch, that sort of area, they almost always have snow chains available. It'll be very rare that they won't have them available, so make sure that you ask. There will be usually a small daily fee for them, but it will be worth it just for your safety if you are going up into the ski fields where it's highly likely to snow at some point. Also, like I said before, if you are going across mountain passes, for instance, and there is forecast for snow, or basically just as a safety backup, it is a good idea to have those available. But if you are only just road tripping around the coastline, that sort of thing, then usually you don't need snow chains, so you don't actually have to pay for that extra fee if you don't need it. Another tip that we have for you is that if you are going on any of the hiking trails in New Zealand, for instance, if you're planning, like you really had on your bucket list, you wanted to do one of the Great Walks, or you wanted to do the Tongariro Alpine Crossing, then you definitely want to reconsider that if you are traveling in July, because a lot of these areas are in alpine regions where it will be under snow. You'll need some alpine sort of special alpine gear to deal with it and know how to use them. So unless you're very skilled in that, it's best to rethink what hiking trails you can do. There are a ton around the country that you can do as alternative hiking trails, even alternative multi-day hikes instead of doing the Great Walks. So yeah, just because you're missing out on those sort of big sort of those places that have been marketed really well and on many people's bucket lists, you don't necessarily have to do them if your safety is, going to be an issue. So yeah, but we have lots of alternative hikes that you can do listed on the website. And then finally, if you're doing some weather dependent activities as you're traveling around New Zealand. For instance, skydives, heli hiking on the glaciers, things to do with helicopters basically. And yeah, if you are planning on doing those things while traveling in July, best in that area to plan at least a couple of days so you have some time to reschedule in case any of those activities are cancelled due to bad weather.
All right, so that is your weather tips, sorry, your travel tips for July in New Zealand. Okay, so now we're going to be covering the typical temperatures in New Zealand in July. So July is basically the midwinter season, so unsurprisingly it's going to be some of the coldest months in New Zealand, and we're gonna have slightly different kind of climate across the whole country, so we'll go region by region so you guys know what to expect. All right, so we're on the map right here, and Laura is going to show you the northern New Zealand area, which is Northland, Auckland and Tauranga, and there the average temperature in July is around 11 degrees Celsius, which is around 52 degrees Fahrenheit. In central North Island, which is your Hamilton, Taupo, Rotorua, you can expect around 7 degrees Celsius, which is around 47 degrees Fahrenheit. Sorry. In southwest North Island, which is New Plymouth, Palmerston North, and the beautiful capital city of Wellington, we're having an average of 9 degrees Celsius in July, which is around 49 degrees Fahrenheit. And finally, in the eastern North Island region, so that's Gisborne, Napier, and the whole Wairarapa region, it's about 9 degrees Celsius, which is about 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Alright, so we're going to be moving down to the south end of New Zealand, and you're going to start seeing some much colder weather and even some more drier weather, but we'll see that a bit later. So, in the northern South Island, in Blenheim and Nelson, you can expect about 7 degrees Celsius, which is around 47 degrees Fahrenheit. In the western South Island, which is Westport, Hokitika, all the way down to Milford Sound, you can expect between 5 to 7 degrees Celsius, which is between 41 and 47 degrees Fahrenheit. In July, and again those are daylight kind of temperatures, right? Gets colder at night. In eastern North Island we have Kaikoura, Christchurch and Timaru, and you can expect 7 degrees Celsius, which is 47 degrees Fahrenheit. Inland South Island, so this is your mountainous areas of Lake Tekapo, Queenstown, Alexandra. You can expect 1 to 3 degrees Celsius, which is 34 to 37 degrees Fahrenheit. And finally, in southern New Zealand, you have Dunedin and Invercargill, and there you can expect 7 degrees Celsius, which is about 47 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so let's continue with our coverage of the weather patterns in July, and this time we're going to be talking about the other type of weather pattern, such as rainfall. So July will experience very much of a mix of weathers, right? You're going to have sun, you're going to have snow, you're going to have rain, you're going to have wind, and you're going to have some really, really awesome days. So don't expect it to be just one type of weather throughout the days. And this is really when the expression in New Zealand of 4 seasons in one day really takes like full effect. July is also the time in New Zealand when you have the shortest daylight hours. So the sun is going to rise between 7:45 a.m. and 8:45 a.m. and it's going to set around 5 p.m. So you're going to have like the sun hanging out low on the horizon, making for amazing view and great photo opportunities, but also shorter days. Now we're going to be talking a little bit about rain, and this is why Laura is standing by a map. Ta-da! Alright, so what kind of rain can you expect in New Zealand? What kind of rain levels, sorry, can you expect in New Zealand in July? So let's begin with northern New Zealand, which is Northland, Auckland and Tauranga. You can expect about 150 millimeters of rain, which is about 6 inches. In central North Island, where you have Hamilton, Taupo and Rotorua, you can expect 110 millimeters of rain, which is about 4 inches. In southwest North Island, which is New Plymouth, Palmerston North and beautiful Wellington, you can expect 140 millimeters of rain, which is about 5.5 inches. And finally, in eastern North Island, in Gisborne, Napier and Wairarapa, you can expect 90 millimeters of rain, which is 3.5 inches. Moving on to the South Islands, in northern South Island, Blenheim and Nelson, you can expect 90 millimeters of rain, which is 3.5 inches. In western South Island, in Westport, Hokitika and Milford Sounds, you can expect 250 to 450 millimeters of rain, which is between 10 and 17.7 inches. Now, I know it's a huge bracket, but the West Coast is known to be really wide and different areas get much more rain. But that said, one of the fun facts is that it is one of the driest months to visit Milford Sound because a lot of the rain is turned into snow. So here you go. If you want less rain in Milford Sound, here you go. Eastern South Island, you can expect 80 millimeters of rain, which is about 3 inches, and that is Kaikoura, Christchurch, and Timaru. Inland South Island, Lake Tekapo, Queenstown, and Alexandra, only about 20 to 50 millimeters of rain, which is 0.7 inches to 2 inches of rain. Again, it's because a lot of it is snow. And finally, in southern New Zealand, that's Dunedin and Invercargill, you can expect 70 millimeters of rain, which is 2.7 inches. Oh, here we go. Laura's going to be back at some point. All right. Yeah.
God, I was gone for so long.
I know. Did you guys miss her? I missed her for like that 1 second she was off screen. Let's continue with our coverage of New Zealand travel in July, and let's talk about the best place to visit in July, beginning with Laura.
Okay, a cool place to visit in July is Queenstown, which is surrounded by several ski fields, and certainly towards the end of July, all the ski fields are usually open, so this is usually a really fun and lively time to be experiencing Queenstown and the ski fields, the nightlife that's happening in the town, as well as all its usual adrenaline activities.
All right, so if you want to escape the winter of New Zealand, well, you may want to head to the winterless north. And that is a nickname that the local give to Northland, the region of Northland, which include Cape Reinga, Whangarei, and the Bay of Islands. It's a great way to get the most clement weather that New Zealand have to offer in July and get to experience, well, a little bit of what New Zealand look like in summer.
Another one is Franz Josef. So as Robin was saying earlier in the video, an interesting fact about the West Coast during winter is that it's actually the time when the West Coast is experiencing a bit less rain than compared to summer. So if you are planning on doing a heli hike, then it's a good time to go and attempt to do that in Franz Josef. Again, we always recommend to book a couple of days there though, because even without doing the heli hike, there's lots of really awesome walking trails to do, hot pools, all that good stuff.
Another great place to visit is Lake Tekapo. Although this is not the best season to see the lupin flowers and get those very, very, very touristy photos of Lake Tekapo, you still get some amazing mountainous landscapes, snow-covered peaks. You have skiing options, hot pool options, ice skating, snowy mountain views, all of that good stuff in Lake Tekapo. So it's a fantastic place to get yourself busy in the New Zealand Alpine Southern Alps.
And our final recommendation would be the North Island town of Taupo, which is basically a town that doesn't change throughout the whole year of in New Zealand. It's surrounded by geothermal activity, so if you want to escape to go to some geothermal hot pools or some geothermal parks nearby, there's that to keep you nice and warm in winter. But other than that, skydiving, bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, jet boating, all that is still available in winter as it is in summer.
All right, so that is our favorite places to visit in New Zealand in July, but we do have much more on the website, so make sure to check out nzpocketguide.com. We do have full travel guides for July, and there's a link in the description below as well.
But in the meantime, how about going through a packing list for July?
Oh, Laura knows that sometimes we forget. Okay, so let's continue with our coverage of July, traveling in New Zealand in July. And let's get started with the packing list of things that you absolutely cannot forget to pack when planning a trip to New Zealand.
All right, first thing is that, well, all these things are going to be related to keeping you warm. So let's start off with a beanie. If you're traveling, especially in the South Island, to places like Queenstown or Lake Tekapo, that's sort of like really chilly center of the South Island, then you'll definitely want to have something to keep the warm in on your head. So nice beanie usually works for that. Likewise, a scarf keeping your neck warm. We will either use sort of a scarf or a buff. Something to just cover up our necks is another way to keep off the chill, so we definitely recommend packing something like that. Something that you should pack any time of the year in New Zealand, but I'm gonna say it again, even for July, is a rain jacket. The weather is very changeable. It rains any month of the year in New Zealand, so it also applies for July. Make sure that you have a rain jacket, and preferably packing that in your day pack as you're going out and about, so that you can always throw it on just in case the weather changes on you. Another thing you will want to pack are some warm mid layers. So we're talking more like, your hoodies or your jumpers, not specifically your underlayer, although we will get onto that, but just something that you can put over the top of whatever you're wearing underneath as an extra layer to keep you warm. And also that's obviously a way that you can, if it does get a bit too warm, maybe you're out in the sun in the middle of the day, something that's easy to also take off as well. And then moving on to some thermal underlayers. So actually, this is what I'm talking about is what I'm wearing right now. It's usually like something thin that you can wear underneath, but it's also an extra warm underlayer. In New Zealand, a lot of people wear merino wool, but you'll find lots of different material used, usually made for different things that you'll find overseas. So whatever you can get your hands on, just a nice thin underlayer that provides some extra warmth is a good idea. Another way to keep warm, woolen socks. So traveling around in cotton socks usually has some disadvantages. If they get wet, usually very cold. If the cold gets to cotton, it usually just feels like you're not really wearing any layers on your feet anyway. So that's why we usually recommend having some woolen socks or some hiking socks. Are usually a lot more effective, and if they unfortunately do get wet, then usually that means they'll dry pretty quickly afterwards. Speaking of your feet getting wet, you'll also want to make sure you pack some waterproof hiking shoes. So the nature of sort of traveling around New Zealand is going out on different walks, going to different sites. They're usually all outdoor attractions, and if the weather does turn and it ends up raining, and if that rain seeps through your shoes, you'll find it really hard to dry your shoes once that happens. So that's why
Laura would. She hates getting wet feet. But aside from that, yeah, it's Laura's pet peeves.
Yeah, so making sure that you pack some good, actually decent waterproof hiking shoes or boots, depending on your preference. I usually go for shoes, Robin goes for boots, we're all different, but as long as they are waterproof, you should be comfortable, you should be fine. And then finally, something to not forget for your winter packing list, for your July packing list, swimwear. So you're probably not thinking, I'm going to go to the beach and go swimming in July. No, you probably don't want to do that, but you probably want to jump in some hot pools. You might even be feeling a little bit crazy and doing some maybe blackwater rafting or whitewater rafting, caving in the glowworms, glowworm caves, that sort of thing. So yeah, make sure you have some swimwear for those sorts of activities.
All right, so this is going to wrap up our New Zealand travel in July kind of tips. We do have a link for you in the description below with an article recapping all this information and pointing you to a lot of other awesome articles that we have, such as a full packing list for winter, an essential to pack for New Zealand, etc. So do make sure to check the link in the description below. In the meantime, let's go back to the live chat.